The rhythmic metallic clatter of the midnight locomotive did nothing to mask the jagged edge in Julian's breathing. He leaned across the narrow expanse of the private cabin's mahogany table, the barrel of his suppressed pistol scraping a deliberate, agonizing line across the polished wood. "You actually believe you can stall until the border crossing," Julian whispered, his lips curling into a sneer that didn't quite hide the frantic twitch in his left eye. He pressed the cold steel of the weapon against the leather briefcase, resting between them. "Open it, now, before I paint this carriage with your arrogant silence." Elias did not look at the gun. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked window, watching the blurred, neon-drenched cityscape streak by in vibrant smears of crimson and gold. He adjusted the pristine cuffs of his charcoal suit, his movements glacial, almost hypnotic in their calm. When he finally turned to Julian, his dark eyes were voids, betraying absolutely nothing. "Panic is a terribly noisy thing, Julian," Elias murmured, his voice a rich, resonant baritone that seemed to absorb the ambient sound of the train. He allowed a microscopic, sympathetic smile to touch the corners of his mouth. "It deafens you to the mechanics of your own trap. You think you are demanding a simple ledger, but you lack the capacity to understand what is actually inside this case." Julian's knuckles bleached white as he gripped the pistol. He slammed his free hand onto the table, the sudden violence rattling the crystal tumblers left by a long-gone porter. "Don't lecture me, you glorified courier," Julian spat, a bead of cold sweat tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "My employers know you stole the Archon files. We know you're trying to sell the structural vulnerabilities of the European grid to the highest bidder. You are a nobody who stumbled into a game played by gods. Open the case." Elias slowly lowered his chin, intertwining his long, elegant fingers on the tabletop. He tilted his head, observing Julian not as a threat, but as a biologist might study a struggling insect under glass. "Knowledge is big thinking, Julian," Elias said, softly, the cadence of his words carrying a chilling, melodic rhythm. "Small minds hoard secrets. Big minds build ecosystems of truth, knowing precisely when to let them collapse. You assume I am a thief because theft is the only currency your employers comprehend." Elias reached forward, his hand steady, ignoring the way Julian instantly raised the pistol to aim directly between his eyes. With a soft, metallic click, Elias unlatched the right side of the briefcase. "Let us change the scenery," Elias whispered, the carriage plunging into sudden total darkness as the train hurtled into a subterranean tunnel. "I find this environment far too constrained for what comes next." The oppressive humidity of the underground transit hub clung to the air like a damp shroud. Water dripped rhythmically from the vaulted concrete ceiling, echoing through the cavernous, abandoned platform. Julian shoved Elias forward, his breathing ragged as he forced the suited man toward a pool of sickly yellow light beneath a flickering halogen bulb. Waiting in the center of the light was Sarah. She stood with the rigid, perfectly aligned posture of a predator, her trench coat pulled tight against the subterranean chill. She didn't hold a weapon, but the calculating, icy sweep of her blue eyes was far more dangerous than the gun trembling in Julian's grip. "He's playing games, Sarah," Julian gasped, his voice cracking as he shoved the briefcase toward her. He unlatched one side, then the power grid in the tunnel shorted. "He's stalling. Make him give up the biometric passkey." Sarah ignored Julian completely. She stepped slowly toward Elias, her heels clicking a sharp, deliberate tempo against the wet concrete. She stopped mere inches from him, her gaze raking over his unruffled suit, lingering on the steady, rhythmic pulse at his throat. "You don't smell like fear," Sarah noted, her voice a silken, dangerous purr that reverberated in the damp space. She narrowed her eyes, a flicker of genuine curiosity breaking her stoic facade. "Every middleman I have ever broken sweats. They bargain, they plead. You just observe. Who are you, Really?" Elias met her gaze, a profound, chilling warmth blooming in his expression. He reached up, his movements so deliberate and unthreatening that neither Sarah nor Julian moved to stop him, and smoothed a stray drop of water from his lapel. "I am someone who appreciates the elegance of a well-laid design, Sarah," Elias replied, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing art over afternoon tea. "Julian here believes I am a courier named Arthur Pendleton. He believes he tracked me through 3 countries, outsmarted my security, and cornered me on that train." Elias allowed a soft, genuine chuckle to escape his lips. "It is deeply fascinating how the human mind constructs narratives to justify its own perceived brilliance." "Shut up," Julian barked, stepping into the light, the pistol wavering wildly. "Sarah, he has the Archon files. If we don't bring the passkey to the director by midnight, we are both dead. Shoot him in the knee. Let's see how elegant his design is when he's bleeding out on the tracks." Sarah raised a solitary gloved hand, silencing Julian instantly. Her eyes never left Elias's face. She tilted her head, the gears of her mind turning visibly behind her piercing stare. "You let Julian catch you," she whispered, the realization draining the color from her cheeks. Her voice lost its silken edge, replaced with a hollow, breathless rasp. "The train, the power failure, you led us down here. Why?" Elias offered her a deeply respectful nod, acknowledging her intellect. "Because, Sarah, the Archon files are not blueprints for a power grid," he said, his voice dropping an octave, wrapping around them like a velvet snare. "They are a financial diagnostic, a mirror reflecting the utter insolvency of the organization you work for, and you cannot deliver a mirror to a blind king without an audience." The private elevator hummed with silent, magnetic efficiency as it ascended toward the penthouse of the glass and steel monolith that pierced the city skyline. Inside the mirrored cab, the dynamic had violently shifted. Julian was backed into the corner, his pistol lowered, his chest heaving as if the oxygen was slowly being siphoned from the small space. Sarah stood perfectly still, her arms crossed tight against her chest, her eyes fixed on the illuminated floor numbers ticking upward. Elias stood at the front of the elevator, bathed in the neon glow of the city filtering through the glass walls. He held the briefcase loosely in one hand. "You're insane," Julian muttered, his voice barely a whimper now, stripped of all its former bravado. He ran a trembling hand through his damp hair. "The director will kill us all the moment those doors open. You don't just walk into his sanctum uninvited." "I am not uninvited, Julian," Elias corrected gently, not turning around. He watched his own reflection in the glass, a faint, melancholic shadow passing over his features. The elevator chimed, a soft, crystalline note that felt deafening in the silence. The doors slid apart, revealing a sprawling, opulent office wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was entirely empty, save for a massive obsidian desk at the far end. There were no guards. There was no director. Sarah stepped out cautiously, her eyes darting across the shadows. She turned back to Elias, her jaw set in a tight, furious line. "Where is he? This was the rendezvous. If this is a trap—" Elias walked slowly past her, his footsteps entirely silent on the plush carpet. He approached the obsidian desk, running his hand reverently along its edge. He turned to face them, the sprawling, electric expanse of the city serving as his backdrop. The mystery that had shrouded him all night finally began to dissolve, replaced by an aura of absolute, crushing authority. "I told you on the train, Julian," Elias said, his voice now projecting across the massive room, carrying the weight of a judge delivering the final verdict. "Knowledge is big thinking. You were sent to intercept a courier who stole the Archon files to prevent them from destroying this company." Elias set the briefcase on the desk and snapped both latches open. He turned the case around.
It was completely empty. Julian's pistol clattered from his numb fingers to the floor. He dropped to his knees, his eyes wide, staring at the vacant velvet interior of the case. "No, no, the director said—" "The director," Elias interrupted, his voice dropping to a devastatingly quiet, commanding whisper, "is a title I invented to keep the board members comfortable while I built this empire from the shadows." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, her eyes wide as she looked at the man she had planned to torture just an hour prior. "You," she choked out, her normally composed voice fracturing completely. "You are the architect." "I am," Elias confirmed, his expression softening into one of grim finality. He looked down at Julian, who was openly weeping on the carpet, entirely broken by the revelation. "I did not steal the files. I created them. I needed to see who within my own organization was corrupt enough to try and buy them back off the black market to save themselves. You two were simply the instruments of my audit." Elias turned his back on them, looking out over the glowing grid of the city he controlled. He adjusted his cuffs one final, meticulous time. "Leave your weapons," Elias commanded softly, the city lights reflecting in his dark, unblinking eyes. "And close the door behind you. I have a great deal of restructuring to do in the morning."